I solved the no good i5 problem. I have a question for you guys. Is this how you expect a motherboard to be shipped to you? No? Well, me neither. But that's how they did it. How you guys doing? Joe here, and today we're going to be talking about that motherboard, which came in this box about a month ago. If you take a look at the picture right here, followed by that picture right there, you will see how badly this motherboard was bent when it got to me. And the main reason is because of that envelope. Yes, it's not a box, it's an envelope. Let me show you in a little more detail. So I'm not sure how good you can see it, especially considering the lights that I have, but this is not a box. It is a big piece of cardboard that was folded into a box-like shape. There's a reason why boxes are boxes, and that's because the extra edges from the flaps that fold in and go the full width of the interior of the package, as well as the crease-sharped broken edges, allow it to have a little bit more strength in the vertical as well as the horizontal. Well, the person that sold me that motherboard had no intention on caring about any of that. I think they were just trying to unload the motherboard. And it's kind of sad because it was my first and only purchase through AliExpress. Now, AliExpress did go ahead and refund me part of the money because by some miracle, even though it's still bent, not bad, but it's still bent, it does work. And I actually had it inside this Fractal Design case for the last month trying to get it to straighten out. So for an entire month, it's been bolted into the motherboard slot. So I finally got another 3470. My buddy who disassembles PC systems sells me the PC components for cost, which is an i5, which is 4-core, 4 threads. And the reason I wanted to do that was I want to replace the AMD system that's been my, my video watching machine because it's a little bit slow. I'm not saying it's horrible, but a Cinebench of 300 in today's terms is quite slow. And I've had this motherboard for a while, and I've just been waiting for him to come up with a processor, and thankfully he managed to do so. Now, let's talk about the board for a second. It's manufactured by BioStar, and it's supposedly a gaming style board. And it's got some cool features, like if you take a look at the heat sinks, they're actually in the shape of a T when it's not backwards. And what that indicates on the T-Series boards is that you can overclock using software. I still prefer to do it in the BIOS, but you can do it in Windows, or I'm not sure if it's compatible with Linux, but you can download a program through BioStar that allows you to overclock the processor in Windows. A couple of cool features about it. It is USB 3.0 ready, although it is in a weird spot there above the second PCIe slot. It does have 3 gigabit as well as 6 gigabit SATA connectors. It also has a LED readout that functions as a postcode reader and secondary function as a temperature sensor when the system is running. But it does have the front audio in a weird spot. You can see it there underneath my pinky finger in red, and the USB 3 slot being there is a little inconvenient. And the little post sticking out of the back from the solder really hurts my hand. One good thing is that it does have power and reset switches directly on the board, so you could run this as an open air test bench, which I may do eventually. Oh, by the way, I did get that back up and running because I needed to. But yeah, today we're going to do a build in this, and I'll go over the parts. The motherboard was $67 through AliExpress, but I got half of that money back, so $28, or excuse me, no, that's right, $28.75. This is my buddy Zotac 750 that I'm using for this purpose. However, I am going to be putting a 970 in it, but for the sake of the video, we'll say $45 for the graphics card. 250 gig hard drive for backup, that's nothing. Probably a $10 hard drive. I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive I'm going to put in there. It's just a spinning hard drive, but it should work pretty good. That's about $50. It's a Western Digital Blue as well. For cooling, I'm going to use... we just ruggedized tested that son of a... For cooling, we're going to use my Corsair 100i. It's a good cooler, it seems to do well. I've used it in the past. For power, I'm going to use a CX500 from Corsair. That'll be plenty of power for this. And I'm intending on doing some funky stuff here, some customization, so make sure that you come back for that video as well. And I'm also going to show you how you can overclock a 3470 even though it's not a K-SKU, and all you need is one of these boards. So next thing to do is to build it into the Fractal Design case, and I usually just do it and come back, and that's what I'm going to do this time because I don't have somebody to help me film. It's just me, and if I run into snags or if I want to talk about any specific thing, then I'll just come back to you. So for now, I'll see you in a second. After spending about an hour doing the build, I think it came out pretty well. It's pretty standard for what I do. However, I did manage to twist those up, but they look kind of cool, so we're going to leave them that way, especially since there's other wires crossing the front of the motherboard due to bad placement of connectors. Weird. This motherboard was more than likely intended for a case with no side windows, so obviously they didn't care where the locations of connectors were. As it sits, that is the Corsair 100i, and it is doing an admirable job keeping it nice and cool. 750 Ti, and you will see how well that does in games in just a few minutes. Couple of hard drivs, and the CX500 power supply. Pretty standard stuff, but it's how you deal with what you have that makes the biggest difference, and let me show you as for why. As you can see, the computer is currently running anywhere from 3.2 to 3.44 gigahertz. That is because it is currently at its stock frequency. I wanted to start it at its stock frequency and then show you what happens when you increase the multiplier and the core clock. Now, I know they claim that it's not an overclockable processor, or it's not a K-SKU, but if you have the right motherboard, such as the TZ75 or a good Z77 chipset, you can. If you look here, you'll see that it is running nice and cool, and it is running anywhere from 1800 megahertz all the way up to 3600 megahertz. That big a spread is common when you're running it at bone stock. First thing we'll do is we will exit out of any programs that are currently running that could slow it down, and we are going to run a Cinebench. One thing I will point out is it runs very low power. Watch what happens when we run the test here. It only runs at 1.16 volts during this test. BT Dubs, that's a 8-year-old monitor, and it still looks good. It's a Gateway 23-inch Full HD LCD panel. A little bit washed out in comparison to like a newer panel, but really good picture. And considering that it's almost 9 years old, it came out in 2010, I think it looks pretty good. Final results for stock speed are in. Comes out to 473 CB. Not terrible, especially when you consider that's 173 over where the last AMD score I could get to was. And I tried for hours to overclock that AMD system farther, and I just couldn't do it. So this one, right out of the box, is 50% faster than that one was. Now the next thing to do is to go back in and monkey with the settings in the BIOS to get the best possible score. So come with me while we do that. One tip is to always make sure to update your BIOS before you start overclocking, because there may have been changes to the code for the processor, as well as maybe updated for faster RAM speeds, because this board, for example, I think came out in 2011. So RAM speeds weren't hitting 2400 megahertz back then. They were 1600, 1866. So newer BIOSes allow for faster memory speeds. I have mine clocked right now to just about 1900 because of the way I have the processor clocked, and I'm about to show you that. So come on in, kids. As you can see, that was the newest BIOS I could get for the system, which is Z75BF518 BST, which was released in 2012. This board was not supported very long, was it? First thing in the BIOS, you'll see that it has the current date in there. You should always do that. If you do not do that, then you run the risk of things not working correctly. I'm not going to go through all the tabs in this motherboard because it's highly unlikely that a lot of us have this motherboard, but I do want to show you the most important thing, and that's this one, which is coincidentally called 1. This is your overclocking utility. Now when you first click on it, this is disabled. Fixed CPU ratio is disabled, and it's set at its stock frequency of 3.2 gigahertz. I enabled it and set a fixed ratio of 40, which is 4 gigahertz. Now it doesn't actually go to 4 gigahertz, it only goes to 3.9 gigahertz. So in the CPU clock, I've changed that to 104.5 or 10450, which gives me a final score of 3972. It's just the way this motherboard is at unlocking this processor, so it gives me almost 4 gigahertz that way. In terms of the voltage, I upped it, but I didn't even have to, and you'll see why when we get back into the desktop. It really wasn't necessary. So let's go ahead and load into the desktop. It's running at 3.95 gigahertz, at least according to Task Manager. Now when you open up Hardware Monitor, you will see it's actually running slightly faster than that. It's actually running at 3.972 gigahertz, like I said. And it's doing so at a very reasonable 40 degrees. Some of the cores are down in the 20s, some of them are in the 30s. But the other thing you can see is that it's locked into that speed now, which is what I want. You can also see it's doing that at 1.212 volts, which is not bad. I could run way higher than that. In fact, I could have left the voltage control at like plus 110 on the millivolts, and it still would have been fine because it runs at 1.16 normally. So I gave it a little bit extra zhoosh just in case I could get more out of it. I'm going to go ahead and run another Cinebench, but I'm not going to record directly off the screen again because it can slow it down a little bit. As we're finishing up here, the score that we get is 552 points. That is an increase of almost 80 points from the last one. Actually, let's scroll down. Let's get the exact number. 473 to 552. That is a substantial increase. That's an almost 20% increase in speed just by clicking a few things. It's free performance. Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? Now, I could push it farther. I have pushed it farther, but those aren't what I would call 24/7 stable overclocks. When you don't have one that's stable 24/7, you don't have a stable system. You could lose information, it could crash during an update and corrupt everything. Those are things you do not want. So to combat that, you need to back it down once you find an overclock to just underneath where it's going to crash. And the other thing I want to point out, you can see it here in the image, the glowing finger will be pointing at it. The i5 4690K stock, this one in fact, returns a Cinebench score of 532. Now I need a new motherboard for this one, and then I can return this one back to a massively overclocked status, which I did have it at where it was running 712, but as a stock entry, this makes 532 CB. So this new system is as fast as a 4690K if you're just one of those people that goes out, buys a system, and uses it as you got it. I'm not one of those people, so to me it doesn't apply. But for, let's say, you or your cousin or your uncle who might just want a computer to play with, it's plenty fast enough. So let's go ahead, we'll jump into some games, and I'll record those using GeForce, and we will just kind of see what kind of CPU percentage we get, because that's the biggest thing. With the AMD system only running at a 300 CB score, it was bottlenecking the GPU. Now a 750 Ti is not a massive card. It's not a super good card. It just is a card, but it was being held back by the AMD system. So now I want to see what it looks like when it has the ability to run to its limit, to its 100% potential. So let's dive into some games. Also, really quickly, here's a little bit of a tip for you guys while that's loading up. If you like to mod your games and you happen to have two computers, this is the way you can play GTA 5 online without getting banned, as well as play it single player with mods. But now that it's loaded, let's jump back in. Now, one of the differences that you can see is the CPU is around 50% and the GPU is around 100%. What that indicates is that now the GPU is the bottleneck as opposed to previously when it was the CPU. And as you can see, we're still getting pretty good frame rates. In the 70s at 1080p on a 1 GB card is not bad. Let's get into downtown so that we can cause a little bit of a ruckus, shall we? Now, using Skyfall allows you to fly around the city, but it also shows you that when you're moving fast, you still don't have much in the way of stuttering. As you can see, there really is no stuttering. This game is playing smooth as butter right now. As you can see, with a lot of explosion, fire, and multiple carnage effects on, I'm still getting over 70 FPS. I am seeing dips down into the 60s, which is not unexpected, but also the CPU still is not hitting 100%. GTA 5 1080p on a 750 Ti, extremely playable. Next, let's load up Counter-Strike Go. So inside the building, as you can see, running very well. In the 200 FPS range. And that was with everybody on the screen at once and shooting fast. So over 200 FPS on a 1 GB card. And once again, as you can see, this is more taxing than the GTA 5 run was, specifically because I've learned that the entire map is loading in at the same time because the gentlemen are moving all over. But it still has plenty of fluidity. 230. So yeah, 1080p experience, totally playable on this CPU. This all started because I ordered a motherboard on AliExpress that was sent to me in the worst condition humanly possible. It also coincided with me frying a motherboard, and again, that was me, not the component itself failing. I was able to solve the i5 problem by getting one from a friend who dismantles PCs and sells the parts rather than just spending money I don't have on a motherboard. I do want to get another motherboard, but I can wait because I have other components that I can use. I also wanted to get back to using this case for something because it'd been sitting underneath the desk for a while, and I went through the effort of, painting the inserts for the hard drives and getting it all cleaned out. And I'm actually going to modify it further, which will be another video. So that's about it. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave them down below. Any comments, leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe. Click over here for another video, and you'll see an update video for the side panel. Oops, I gave it away, as well as a car video that I did for a Diesel Colorado. So those will be populating here soon. As for right now, I'm kind of tired. I've been up for 19 hours because I tried to do push-ups and hurt myself. Yay, disabilities. And I'll talk to you later.